second cousin who lived under the roller coaster in Coney Island.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where I grew up too.
Anyway, Larry consented to do an interview, and then he will do a question and answer session with people, and if you guys have any questions for Larry. So I'm going to get started. First question.
No pressure, though. No pressure.
Okay, Larry. A lot of people maintain that all great comedy writers come from old school neighborhoods in Brooklyn. Examples: Neil Simon, Woody Allen, Mel Brooks, Gary David Goldberg, and Mark Lawrence, and and of course Larry Charles.
And Larry David. Larry David's from Brighton as well.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, I didn't know that. How do you think growing up here and going to John Dewey affected your career path and your overall creativity?
Well, first of all, growing up in Brooklyn, as you may all know, is a sometimes brutal experience. And you're often running away from people. Many times in my childhood, I would turn a corner and there'd be 20 guys there ready to kick my ass. And I think what I did was I kind of learned how to verbally sort of talk my way, which became very valuable when I did Borat. I learned how to talk my way out of trouble. And I think getting laughs, lightening the pressure of the situation, I think you learn how to survive, and you kind of develop and hone those skills. And then you get lucky enough to be able to apply them to a job where that's called for, and I'm very lucky that way.
That's very true.
A lot of beatings led to this, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Brooklyn had its share of bullies. And
I'm a lot bigger than Mel Brooks and Woody Allen and those guys. I still got my ass kicked. So you see, it's not...
Okay.
If I may go to the second question, the second part of the question about Dewey itself. The thing about Dewey that really was so important to me, and why I loved the school so much, was I was living, we grew up in Trump Village, which is right between Brighton and Coney Island, very surprisingly tough neighborhood actually. And junior high school, public school and junior high school had been brutal, and I was not looking forward to going to Lincoln, which was my neighborhood school, and having 4 more years or 3 more years of that kind of madness. Dewey had just opened up at that time. It had offered an experimental curriculum, independent study, no mandatory attendance, which of course we all took advantage of, and no marks. And so here was a place where you could kind of start fresh, start anew, and have a new experience, a new paradigm to draw from that was very, very different than the typical Brooklyn experience I'd had up until then. And so in a way, Dewey kind of saved me. It made me feel okay about wanting to pursue these ideas. When we were in junior high school, my friend Neil is here, who I grew up with, when we were in elementary school or junior high school, and you wanted to be an artist or an actor, you would just get beaten up. That was the answer to that. You know what I mean? But here was a place where you could draw, you could sing, you could dance, you could act, and there would be somebody actually patting you on the back for that, which was amazing. And that was one of the great things about Dewey when I went here.
Okay, well, thinking back...
Let me say one other thing. I'm going to keep interrupting him. Is that all right? Yeah.
What?
One more thing. I was going to say that, think about it. If you think about it for a second, we all start off life being able to sing and dance and draw and act and play, and by the time we get out of college, none of us could do that anymore. Why is that? And Dewey was a place that sort of asked that question. Why can't you continue doing that? Why can't that be part of your life? Why do you have to leave that behind? And it gave me kind of like a path to take, so again.
Well, thinking back to your days at John Dewey, what were your creative aspirations at 16 or 17 for your career?
Oh my God, I really, if I could get out of Brooklyn, that was the first thing. Can I get on the train and go to Manhattan? That was like a big deal for me, from being where I'm from, it was kind of a joke to think about having an actual career in show business, My father had been, in World War II, my father had been a comedian, actually during World War II, during the occupation years, and after, in New York City, when it was kind of a fertile time for comedians, Lenny Bruce and all those people, Buddy Hackett was starting to kind of play then, and he went to dramatic school on the GI Bill, my dad. And he had Jason Robards as a teacher and all this kind of stuff. And then he eventually dropped out, but he would take all his friends from dramatic school, stayed in show business in one form or another. They were like lighting managers of the Ed Sullivan Show, or they were the stage manager of the Kraft Music Hall, which was in Brooklyn at that time. The studio was actually in Brooklyn on Avenue M. And he would take me to the Ed Sullivan rehearsals. He would take me to the Kraft Music Hall, and I would see the behind the scenes before I actually saw the show. And I remember just being fascinated, because you'd watch something on TV as a kid, and you go, that's the way it is. It just happens that way. And I learned that, oh my God, all this infrastructure is in place to make that illusion seem real, you know? And I think it planted a seed in my head that I was interested in that. I also was a cartoonist. The main thing I did here artistically was draw. I was the caricaturist and the political cartoonist for, you know, the 12 school newspapers that were going on at that time, which is another thing we should talk about. I mean, when Harold first asked me to do this, I said, well, you know, it'd be cool if maybe the editor of the school newspaper could do the interview. That would be kind of cool. And Harold sadly told me there's no school newspaper anymore at all. And I feel like that's something, hopefully, that we could help here to give kids a chance to have some kind of expression. There's so many things going on in the world that they want to talk about, and they need to find some kind of venue for those expressions. So that's, again, something that Dewey provided me.
Yeah, I was surprised to find that the school newspaper was gone. Yeah. I used to go to the Kraft Music Hall on Avenue M all the time. I used to love when they had shows over there. That was so much fun. Was there an aspect of Dewey's educational philosophy that helped you achieve the great level of success that you have?
Definitely no mandatory attendance. That was it. That was the key. Once you knew you didn't have to go, it kind of liberated you. No, I mean, there was, again, just to reiterate, there were great teachers. They were really into the kids. They were into giving the kids an ability to express themselves. It was a very free-form environment at that time, which most schools were not. And in that sense, it was a liberating experience.
Wow. Okay. Many here are big fans of your work on Seinfeld. While Larry David hatched the Cosmo Kramer character, you are credited with developing the character and making him a much larger presence on the show. Did your relationship with Michael Richards from your days as a writer on ABC's Fridays impact this process?
Well, definitely. Michael, as you've come to know, is a very difficult person sometimes to get along with. And he sometimes gets impulsive and says things on stage that he's not supposed to say, and, you know, he does. Yeah. And I was good with him. We had a good rapport, and he trusted me. And he also had worked with Larry, obviously, on Fridays, Larry David as well. So he was very open to our input at that time. And I think what happened was that, you know, you had Jerry playing Jerry. You had Larry David, essentially, George was Larry David's surrogate. And so where was there room for me? There was room for me in the Kramer character. The Kramer character originally was just a next door neighbor. He would come in from one scene and leave, and that he wouldn't be part of the story. And I started to think about stories for Kramer, getting him out of the house, getting him into the story more. And I think that between that and Michael Richards' gifts, he became the kind of character that he was. But I mean, for me, it was like being George Harrison on the Beatles. You know, George Harrison is a very talented guy, but he was working with John and Paul. And it was very hard for George Harrison to get his songs on the record. And so it was hard for me to get my scripts on the show. And I got a lot, but still it was frustrating because those guys were so great and they controlled it. So that's why George Harrison had to go solo, and I did too.
Wow. Okay, Curb Your Enthusiasm